Thomas Poynton was born at Carnstown, Ballivor in 1801. He went on to make a name for himself in New Zealand. He never forgot his native place or his native land, and his name is commemorated here as well in Carnstown. Thomas worked as a treasure reaper. He and 14 others were caught up in some local unrest, possibly white boy activities against the landlord. They were tried, convicted, and transported from Cork to New South Wales for 7 years. Thomas was convicted in 1822 and sentenced to 7 years transportation to Australia. A 7-year sentence was handed out for relatively minor crimes such as stealing 2 pigs or assault. Aged 20, he arrived in Sydney aboard the ship the Countess of Harcourt. Other Meath convicts travelled with him. Poynton received a ticket of leave which allowed convicts to work for themselves. They could not leave the colony. If they were of good behaviour, they got their certificate of freedom, usually after their sentence was served. A certificate of freedom was issued at the completion of a convict's service as proof that he was a free man. This certificate here was provided by Judy Carroll to me. They were free to travel anywhere and could return to Ireland or England. After receiving his ticket of freedom on the 17th of July 1829, Thomas married Mary Kennedy, who was of Irish-born parents, and they married in Sydney. In 1828, Thomas left for Hokianga, New Zealand, to begin trading in timber. Mary was horrified when the first thing she saw when she landed was a woman's head on a pole. Their first daughter, known by her married name, Mrs. MacDonald, was the first European child born in New Zealand. The Poyntons bred cattle and milled timber on Mangamuka River. They got on well with the Methodist missionaries who worked locally. They farmed over 4,500 acres and travelled back regularly to Sydney, where they had their children baptised in the Catholic faith. Poynton's wife took her first 2 children on a journey of over 2,000 miles to be baptised. There would have been 2 or 3 vessels going to Sydney every week, but it was still a major journey. Hearing in 1835 of the arrival of Bishop Polding in Sydney, Poynton went to see if services of a priest could be obtained for the Catholics, about 20 who were now resident in New Zealand. A friend of Poynton's, Thomas Cassidy, also a native of Meath, wished to marry the daughter of a Maori chief, but would not do so until she had been baptised into the Catholic faith. In 1835, Thomas Cassidy took his partner, Maria Curry, to Sydney so that they could be married and have their first baby baptised. Poynton went to Australia to witness the marriage. Years later, Cassidy was killed by his wife for his continual drinking and womanising. Bishop Polding sent Poynton's request to Rome, and the Pope dispatched Bishop Pompallier to this new territory. When Bishop Pompallier arrived in New Zealand in January 1838, he celebrated the first Mass in the living room of the 4-roomed cottage belonging to the Poyntons. Hearing that the bishop, along with a priest and others, were going to arrive, many local Catholics squeezed into the small room for Mass. Following the Mass, the Poyntons' baby daughter, Catherine, became the first baby in New Zealand to be baptised by a Catholic priest. A week later, Thomas's son, Edward, suddenly died, and he became the first Catholic in the country to receive a church burial. The Methodist missionaries operating amongst the Maori people are said to have thought that the bishop was intruding on their territory, and they allied themselves with the Maoris. And the Maoris said that they did not wish to be served by somebody from a foreign chief, in other words, the Pope, and to deprive the Maoris of their lands and make them change their old customs. Bishop Pompallier replied that he had come as a friend and did not wish to deprive them of their country or anything belonged to them. One old story has Poynton calling up natives loyal to him to repulse the other tribe and also repulse the Methodists. The Poynton family lived through a period of unrest by the native Maori, but seemed to get on with their native neighbours. They lived in an area where the Treaty of Waitangi was signed between the Maori and the British. One Maori chieftain, Heke, said the treaty was not being abided to and cut down the British flag, and this led to a short war. Poynton used to boast that he drove cattle through Heke's fortress to the troops on the other side so that they would have food. The Maoris allowed this, as they did not think it was correct for their enemies to be without food. The Poynton family moved to Auckland, becoming pillars of society. Poynton was a great supporter of Home Rule for Ireland, and he followed the story closely. In 1889, the leader of the Irish Home Rule Party, John Dillon, visited Australia and New Zealand, and he was given a great welcome by Thomas Poynton. Mary Poynton died in October 1890 at the age of 79. Thomas lived on until 1890, when he was 90. They were buried side by side in the cemetery. In 1954, Archbishop Liston of Auckland unveiled a plaque marking the site where the family home once stood in Cairnstown. At the time, the Poynton family were still in the area, living in Ballyhealy, Delvin and Cloneycavan. In 2008, the Bishop of Meath, Dr. Michael Smith, visited Poynton's grave in New Zealand.